There's a lot of NHL coaching openings that are going to take place over the summer. We saw Sheldon Keefe get the axe earlier this week, and it's time to maybe introduce you to some of the top coaching talent in the AHL right now who could get picked. Well, even though the Laval Rocket did not make the postseason, there is plenty for us to talk about this week in terms of not only Laval, but the AHL in general. We're going to get a snapshot of what the North Division semifinal round of the playoffs looks like. You remember Laval was ousted by Belleville, and we'll talk about them and others in the North Division who are still in playoff action. Talk about kind of the next steps for the Laval Rocket. What's the first big priority on their plate? And really the big thing, there's a lot of NHL coaching openings that are going to take place over the summer. We saw Sheldon Keefe get the axe earlier this week. And it's time to maybe introduce you to some of the top coaching talent in the AHL right now who could get picked for those kinds of roles. And no one better to talk about all of that with us than the one and only Patrick Williams, AHL expert. He's a features writer for the AHL.com. He's also the AHL columnist for NHL.com and a member of our Rocket Sports team. Patrick, great to see you.
Great to be seen. Thanks for having me.
Always good to talk to you. I guess first and foremost, we definitely want to talk about those potential top coaching talent candidates who might get a look for NHL jobs, but we're going to save that for just a moment. First, even though Laval's not in it, the Calder Cup playoffs are going strong. In fact, they are currently in the division semifinal rounds. And looking at the North Division specifically, we know that Belleville, unfortunately, were the ones that eliminated Laval from playoff contention. And they actually went on to beat the Toronto Marlies in that best of three play-in round. And so now who are they matched up with in the North Division semifinal? And how's that matchup going?
They're matched up with Cleveland, the regular season champion of the division. Right now, it's 2-1 Cleveland going into Friday night. It's one back-to-back in overtime. One in Belleville and one at Rocket Mortgage. I remember the name, Fieldhouse in Cleveland. So game four is Friday night. Monsters Sens. It's an interesting series in the sense that you have both NHL teams, their parent teams are done. So you really have full rosters for both clubs. You're not dealing with call-ups like some other teams are that are still playing and still have an NHL club playing as well. So it's been a tight series. Like every game, is been right, down to the wire pretty much, and that's kind of been the MO for Belleville in general. It's like they had kind of that, Rocket fans will attest to that down to the wire finish just to get in the playoffs. They had obviously the tight series with Toronto. Now they're with Cleveland, so in Cleveland, they're a team that's there's a fair amount of pressure on that group, I think. Mm-hmm. With everything that's going on in Columbus, with general manager, obviously, that role to be filled. A lot of players, there's going to be some turnover, I think, really across the board with that franchise. And so this is a chance to make an impression, going into the summertime. So there's a fair amount of pressure for sure on Cleveland right now for those players to do something.
And so now the other matchup going on in the North Division is Syracuse and Rochester?
Yes, yeah, Syracuse, Rochester. Feels like that series has been going on for a while, and that's because it has. It's started April 28th, so 2 weeks ago. Right now it's 2-2 going into deciding game 5 tonight in Rochester. Last game, Syracuse had a chance to knock Rochester out. They were up 3-0 going into third period. Rochester comes back, ties at 3-3, wins it overtime. And so, yeah, you can imagine the stress there for Syracuse. In terms of you had that series seemingly under control, and now you're going into a winner take all game, and it's interesting too with having a 6-day break between games 4 and 5.
Mm-hmm.
Like how much of that momentum carries over? Probably not much. It's almost kind of like just a blank slate for both clubs. But yeah, it's an interesting setup just in terms of 5 games in 2 weeks, and then these big gaps between games. So it's it's a little bit. Syracuse and Rochester went through this last year, playing each other, similar setup. So we're kind of doing deja vu all over again in terms of, just the dynamic of, a best of 5 series is different to start with. And then certainly one that's stretched out as long as this one has been.
Well, we'll keep an eye, of course, on that as it progresses, particularly how the North Division goes through that divisional final round, which will be the winners of these 2 contests that we just talked about. And then, of course, we'll look farther than that once we get on to conference finals, and then the actual Calder Cup final between Eastern and Western Conference. As we mentioned, Laval did not qualify for the playoffs. They were eliminated in the final weekend against Belleville. So it's really, at this stage of the game in the offseason for an AHL club, it's early to be talking about rosters. It's way early to be talking about free agency or potential signings and that kind of thing. But the one thing that probably seems to be the most glaring priority probably for the Laval Rocket is figuring out if JF Houle is going to still be behind the bench in the fall, if he's going to get an extension, or if Kent Hughes and Jeff Gorton decide that it's time for a new voice behind the bench in Laval.
Yeah, you're right. This time of the year, if you don't make the playoffs, once that final game hits and you have the breakup day, which Laval had a very quick breakup day. They finished on a Saturday night. They were doing it on a Sunday morning at like 9 a.m. So they wasted no time in wrapping things up. So yeah, it's been quiet now for the past 3 weeks almost. But you're right. The JF Houle question is first and foremost. And I think the thing with Houle is, he's the hire of a previous regime.
That's right.
Always a tough spot. And as a coach, when your current bosses are the people that replaced your boss that hired you before. So
right.
Well, in terms of generally AHL coaches are judged on two criteria. One, of course, is development. The second part is winning. He's done some of both. I think to his credit. Obviously 2 years ago they went to the conference final, Game 7. They didn't reach the final, but certainly a high quality finish. Last year they did qualify. They were knocked out in that first round, and then this year they came down to the wire, did not make it. Kind of an up and down season, but I think to their credit, they did have a pretty strong second half after we all saw that first 2 months or so of the season, and it was looking pretty bleak for this team. They did manage to turn it around, get the whole team on track. So that's the first part. The second part is development. I think that if you look through his development track, it's been relatively successful in the sense of you have Harvey Pinard came through, Primo came through, Ullinen came through. So he's had some successes. In terms of getting players onto the NHL who are able to stick there. So that's certainly a point in his favor. But I think the second part of the development question now is you have this next wave, right? So you had Mayu come in this year, you had Struble, you had Joshua Waugh, you had Heineman, guys like that, right?
Yeah.
Yes. And then that's kind of that next wave. So it's Reinbacher. You really have an important class of young prospects, either players that came in this year or players that are going to be full-time rookies in Laval next year. And sometimes coaches I don't say they get lucky, but sometimes they're in a period where there's a down cycle in terms of prospects that are, you know, important high level prospects that are coming through. And as a coach, maybe then you can pull back a little bit on the development and you can be judged more on your winning.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but now, now, I mean, certainly this year we saw this shift toward development being the top priority with Laval. It's going to be
Definitely.
even more so next year. It really is. It's a unique level to coach at. It'll be interesting to see where they go with him as the next year, or do they go in a different direction altogether?
Absolutely. And it's certainly the thing that we're keeping an eye on to see how soon they make that decision. As you said, coaching at this level is presents a completely new set of challenges for coaches who have not coached in the AHL before, with the constant roster turnover, with call-ups and so forth, not to mention injuries, not to mention guys from junior coming in at the end of the season or from European leagues or wherever they might come from. It's a whole new set of challenges, but there definitely are, just like with players, just like with officials, the AHL is also a development league for coaching staff as well. And we've seen it time and time again. Spencer Carberry doing a great job in Washington this year after having been a tremendous coach with the Hershey Bears, the Washington Capitals AHL affiliate. And with the amount of coaching vacancies that are now on the table at the NHL level, it's certainly not beyond the realm of thinking that at least one of those organizations might not look at the AHL to tap some fresh talent that isn't the same names getting recycled throughout the NHL. So I wanted to get your opinions on right now. A lot of hockey fans aren't necessarily familiar with the coaches and the top talent in that aspect at the AHL level. So I wanted to get your thoughts on who maybe two or three of the top, probably most primed coaches to maybe get a promotion to the NHL in the not so distant future might be. And I'm betting Seth Appert's going to be one of the ones that you name.
Seth Appert, yes, certainly on that list. We'll start with Seth Appert. He's been in Rochester since the lockout season, the pandemic season, 2021. He was brought in by Buffalo as like a real development oriented coach. He was somebody that was coming, almost 20 years in the college range. So a much different dynamic, obviously, from the pro game.
Mm-hmm.
He had to come in, he had to kind of learn that whole pro way of coaching, which is even more so, I think, difficult at the AHL level where you're dealing with so many moving parts. He's done a fantastic job, though. He sent several players on to Buffalo, Jack Quinn, JJ Peterka, UPL and net. I can never say his name.
Pekka Luukkonen.
Yes, I always did. Like just a real steady stream of prospects on to Buffalo, which is exactly what they hired him for.
Mm-hmm.
The team has had some success as well. Rochester has in terms of winning. They got to the conference final last year. They're obviously in the playoffs again this year. So he has a pretty good resume he can put out there now. 4 years in the AHL, obviously, along with that extensive college experience. Very smart, very personable, very charismatic, which certainly I think helps you in the interview. Obviously, whatever industry you're in, whether you're in the hockey coaching industry or you're, going for an office job, like having that real dynamic personality, I think helps quite a bit. So he's one. Todd Nelson and Hershey. Hershey's been a coaching factory throughout the years. You mentioned Carberry. Bruce Boudreau's come through there as well. Strott Allen, who's an NHL assistant, came through there. So certainly, I would think he'd have to be a top candidate for different jobs. He's coach of the year in the AHL. He's won the Calder Cup twice as a head coach, once as an assistant, and once as a player. So 4 times. He had Hershey within 1 point of the all-time best record in the regular season this year. They're in the playoffs right now. He's a guy that, like, even off the record, players will just tell you, how much they respect him. He's got that real father figure personality,
Mm-hmm.
and he's one of those coaches, like, he's a good feel for the room. Like he knows, like, he treats his players with enough, respect and kind of leniency as far as they'll let him. And then, but if they slack off, like he pulls the reins very hard, and like he has a good feel for how to manage personalities. He had 46 games in Edmonton as a interim coach about almost a decade ago now. For reasons I don't totally understand, he's never really gotten much of a shot since. He was an assistant with Dallas for 4 years before coming back to the AHL with Hershey. So, his resume really does tick all the boxes in terms of everything you want: NHL level, AHL level, assistant, head coach. He wins, he develops. Really, there's not a gap on that resume in terms of what he can do. So he's the second one. Third one is Carl Taylor in Milwaukee. Got a lot of attention last year, taking them to the conference final. I've wondered this about coaches. I wondered this about Nelson. I wondered this about Taylor's. I think sometimes you can almost be a victim of your success because April, May, June is when a lot of that interviewing for head coaching jobs is going on, and you have your team in the playoffs. It can be a little tough, right? To kind of get that attention and get that time. So Carl Taylor, a lot of ways very similar to Todd Nelson, personality wise. He's just commands a lot of respect. A guy who's worked his way up, right through the ranks, all the way from youth sport, back in the 90s, and through the ECHL. He's been an assistant. He's been a head coach. Now into the AHL. He's part of that Nashville system, which is just fantastic in terms of both winning and development. So again, another guy with good charisma, which certainly helps as well. And I think certainly a guy who's been talked up quite a bit. And I think at some point you're definitely going to see him behind an NHL bench as well.
Well, there you have it. Those are three names that you may or may not be familiar with or have heard in passing, but three names that could be in the conversation, who knows, for any number of NHL head coaching or assistant coaching positions come September. So, Patrick, we appreciate you kind of giving a glimpse at who might be next up and on deck in terms of coaches, because there's certainly going to be a lot of new coaches assigned to new teams when the seasons start again in the fall. Yes. We always appreciate you being here. Always a wealth of knowledge about the AHL. We look forward to having you back again soon.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
And of course, we talked a little bit there about the next step maybe for Laval is taking a look at whether or not they're going to extend JF Houle. But what about what's going on with the Montreal Canadiens? Well, they also have some real opportunities this summer to make some short-term gains and some long-term gains to shore up the next step of the rebuild. And it's something that Rick and Michael took a really close examination of. What are the targets and the opportunities that the Canadiens have waiting for them this summer? And that was all on the latest episode of the Canadiens Connection podcast, which if you missed it, you can check it out on this video right here. And we'll see you again next time.